My name is Margaret Sullivan. I'm 72 years old, and I've been a plus-size woman my entire life. I've lived in Manhattan for over 50 years, and I thought I had seen everything this city could throw at me. I thought I was immune to cruelty, that I had developed thick skin after decades of sideways glances, whispered comments, and rolled eyes. But on that cold Tuesday morning in February, as I boarded the M15 bus on First Avenue, I discovered that no amount of time can truly prepare you for public humiliation at the hands of someone who's supposed to serve the public. It was 7:30 in the morning, and I was heading to my volunteer shift at the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue. I do this 3 times a week, helping senior citizens navigate the computer systems and find books they're looking for. It gives me purpose, keeps me connected to my community, and honestly, it makes me feel useful in a world that often treats women my age, especially women my size, as if we're invisible or worse, as if we're obstacles to be avoided. The bus was crowded that morning, as it always is during rush hour. Workers heading to their offices, students with their backpacks, mothers with strollers, everyone packed together in that typical New York way where personal space becomes a luxury no one can afford. I stepped onto the bus, my Metro card ready in my hand, and that's when I saw him. The conductor, a man in his late 30s with a thin mustache and cold eyes, looked me up and down with an expression I've seen too many times in my life. It was a mixture of disgust and amusement, as if my very existence was somehow offensive to him. I tapped my Metro card on the reader, and as I did, I heard him snicker. It was quiet at first, just a little sound under his breath, but I heard it. My heart started beating faster because I knew what was coming. After 7 decades on this earth, you develop an instinct for cruelty. You can sense it in the air before it strikes, like animals can sense a storm approaching. I started walking toward the back of the bus, looking for a place to stand since all the seats were taken. My knees aren't what they used to be, and standing on a moving bus is difficult for me, but I've learned to manage. I was holding onto the overhead rail, trying to steady myself as the bus lurched forward, when I heard his voice cut through the morning chatter like a knife. "Watch out, everybody. We got a big load today," he shouted, and several passengers turned to look. "Make sure you hold on tight, or this old fat pig might knock you over." The words hit me like a physical blow. Old fat pig. He said it loud enough for the entire bus to hear. Loud enough that there was no mistaking who he was talking about. Loud enough that everyone within earshot stopped their conversations and turned to stare at me. And then, the worst part happened. People started laughing. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that the sound of their laughter created a wave of humiliation that washed over me, drowning me in shame. A young man in a business suit chuckled and shook his head. 2 teenage girls giggled and whispered to each other, their phones already out, probably recording the whole thing. An older woman, someone who should have known better, someone who could have been my contemporary, smiled and looked away. Complicit in her silence, I stood there, frozen in place. My hand gripping the rail so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My face burned with embarrassment, and I could feel tears starting to form in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I would not give any of them that satisfaction. The conductor continued his commentary as the bus moved through traffic. "Better hope we don't hit any bumps or she'll bring this whole bus down." More laughter, more stares. More phones pointed in my direction, capturing my humiliation for social media consumption. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor of that bus to open up and swallow me whole. I wanted to scream at him, to defend myself, to tell him that I was a human being who deserved respect, that my body size didn't give him the right to mock me in front of strangers. But the words wouldn't come. They were trapped in my throat, suffocated by decades of being told to be quiet, to not make a scene, to accept mistreatment with grace and dignity. The ride to my stop felt like it lasted hours, though it was only about 15 minutes. 15 minutes of standing there, being stared at, being the object of ridicule and entertainment for people who would forget about me the moment they stepped off that bus and went about their days. 15 minutes of feeling smaller than I've ever felt, despite my body size being the very thing they were mocking. When the bus finally reached my stop at 42nd Street, I made my way to the exit as quickly as my legs would carry me. As I passed the conductor, he made one final comment, quieter this time, but loud enough for me to hear. "Try to fit through the door, Grandma." I stepped off that bus and onto the sidewalk, and only then did I allow myself to breathe. The cold February air hit my face, and I realized my cheeks were wet. The tears I had fought so hard to hold back had escaped without my permission, streaming down my face as I stood there on the corner of First Avenue and 42nd Street, feeling more alone and humiliated than I had felt in years. I thought about skipping my volunteer shift. I thought about going home, crawling into bed, and hiding from the world. But instead, I wiped my tears, straightened my coat, and walked toward the library. Because that's what I've always done. I've endured. I've survived. I've kept moving forward even when the world has tried to knock me down. But something was different this time. As I walked those 3 blocks to the library, something began to shift inside me. The humiliation I felt started to transform into something else. Something harder, something sharper, something that felt a lot like anger. And for the first time in a very long time, I decided that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to just endure anymore. Maybe it was time to fight back. If this story of a courageous plus-size woman has already moved you, leave your like now so that more people can watch this video. To understand why that moment on the bus affected me so deeply, you need to know who I was before that Tuesday morning and who I had been for most of my life. I wasn't always the woman who would fight back. I wasn't always someone who believed I deserved better. For most of my 72 years, I had been someone who accepted mistreatment as the price I had to pay for existing in a body that society deemed unacceptable. I grew up in Brooklyn in the 1950s and 60s, the youngest of 4 daughters in a working-class Irish Catholic family. My father worked at the docks, and my mother took in sewing to help make ends meet. We didn't have much money, but we had each other, and for a long time, that felt like enough. I was a chubby child. The kind of little girl who was always described as having such a pretty face by relatives who couldn't bring themselves to give an unqualified compliment. By the time I was a teenager, I was what people called heavy set, and by my 20s, I was definitively fat. Not pleasantly plump, not curvy, not any of the euphemisms people use to avoid saying the word fat. That's what I was. And that's what I've been for over 50 years. I married young, at 21, to a man named Robert who worked as an accountant in Midtown. He was a good man in many ways, responsible and steady, but he was also someone who constantly reminded me that I was lucky he had chosen me. "Not many men would want a woman your size," he told me more than once during our 38 years of marriage. "You should be grateful," and I was grateful. That was the tragedy of it. I actually believed I was lucky that someone had agreed to marry me, to be seen in public with me, to share a life with me despite my unforgivable flaw of being fat. I spent decades trying to make myself smaller, not just physically but in every way. I tried to take up less space, to have fewer opinions, to need less, to be less of a burden. Robert and I had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and I threw myself into motherhood with the kind of intensity that comes from having no other outlet for your energy and intelligence. I was a good mother, attentive and loving, always available for school events and homework help and late-night conversations. But I was also a mother who never taught her children that their mother deserved respect, because I didn't believe I deserved it myself. After Robert died 8 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I found myself alone for the first time in my adult life. My children were grown with families of their own, living in other parts of the country, calling dutifully once a week, but living their own busy lives. I sold the house in Queens that we had lived in for 35 years and moved to a small 1-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side, close to Central Park where I could walk when my knees allowed it. I built a quiet life for myself. I volunteered at the library 3 days a week. I took a watercolor painting class at the senior center on Tuesdays. I had a small group of friends, other women my age, and we would meet for coffee or sometimes see a matinee at one of the theaters in the neighborhood. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was mine, and I had convinced myself that I was content. But contentment and happiness are not the same thing, and if I'm being honest, I wasn't happy. I was existing. I was filling my days with activities and interactions that kept me from confronting the deep loneliness and sense of worthlessness that had been my constant companions for as long as I could remember. The truth is, I had spent my entire life believing the message that society had been sending me since I was a little girl. That message was simple and brutal. Your body is wrong, and therefore you are wrong. You are less than. You don't deserve the same respect, the same opportunities, the same love as people in smaller bodies. You should be ashamed of yourself. And you should spend every day trying to become someone else, someone smaller, someone more acceptable. I had internalized that message so completely that when people were cruel to me, when they made jokes about my size or excluded me from activities or treated me as if I was invisible, I didn't get angry at them. I got angry at myself. I blamed myself for being fat, for not having enough willpower to lose weight, for not being strong enough to transform myself into someone society could accept. The incident on the bus wasn't the first time I'd been publicly humiliated because of my size. It wasn't even the 10th time or the 20th time. It was simply the most recent in a long series of degrading experiences that stretched back decades. But it was different somehow, and I couldn't quite understand why at first. Maybe it was because I was older now, and the cruelty felt especially pointed when combined with ageism. Old fat pig, he had called me, combining two of society's favorite targets into one efficient insult. Or maybe it was because I had been feeling particularly vulnerable lately. Aware of my mortality, in a way I hadn't been when I was younger, wondering what legacy I would leave behind, what my life had meant, or maybe, just maybe, I had finally reached a breaking point. Maybe after 72 years of accepting mistreatment, of making myself smaller, of apologizing for my existence, something inside me had simply had enough. Maybe that conductor on the M15 bus had unknowingly pushed me past a threshold I didn't even know existed. As I sat at my desk in the library that morning, helping an elderly gentleman figure out how to send an email to his grandson, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I couldn't stop hearing that conductor's voice, seeing the faces of the people who had laughed, feeling the weight of their judgment and cruelty. And for the first time, instead of directing all that pain inward, instead of turning it into self-hatred and shame, I felt something else beginning to bloom inside me. It felt unfamiliar and almost frightening in its intensity. It felt like righteous anger. It felt like the beginning of change. The rest of that day at the library passed in a blur. I went through the motions of my volunteer work, smiling at patrons, answering questions about how to use the computer catalog, helping people find the books they were looking for. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Inside, I was still standing on that bus, reliving every second of that humiliation, feeling it wash over me again and again, like waves crashing against rocks. By the time my shift ended at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. It was an emotional exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. I said goodbye to my fellow volunteers and the library staff, gathered my coat and purse, and stepped out onto Fifth Avenue. The February sun was bright, but provided little warmth, and I pulled my coat tighter around me as I walked. I should have gone home, but I couldn't face the thought of being alone in my small apartment with nothing but my thoughts for company. Instead, I found myself walking west toward Central Park, toward the bench near the conservatory garden where I sometimes sat when I needed to think. It took me nearly 30 minutes to walk there, my knees protesting with every step, but I barely noticed the discomfort. My mind was consumed with replaying the morning's events, examining them from every angle, picking at them like a wound that wouldn't heal. Why hadn't I said something? Why had I just stood there and taken it? Why had I let him humiliate me without defending myself? I sat down on my favorite bench, the one with a view of the garden's entrance, and that's when the tears came again. Not the quiet tears I had shed on the street corner that morning, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the humiliation I had experienced that morning. I cried for all the other times I had been treated as less than human because of my body size. I cried for the girl I had been, the one who had started believing she was unworthy before she even understood what that meant. I cried for the woman I had become, the one who had spent 72 years apologizing for existing. An elderly man walking his dog stopped and asked if I was all right, genuine concern in his voice. I managed to nod and wave him away, not trusting myself to speak without breaking down completely. He hesitated for a moment, clearly uncertain whether to believe me, but eventually moved on, leaving me alone with my grief. Because that's what it was, I realized. Grief. I was grieving for the life I could have had if I had believed I deserved better. I was grieving for all the opportunities I had let pass me by because I didn't think someone like me had the right to reach for them. I was grieving for the relationships I had settled for, the dreams I had abandoned, the smaller version of myself I had forced myself to become. The conductor's words kept echoing in my mind. Old, fat pig. Such simple words, just 3 words really, but they carried the weight of 72 years of similar messages. Every diet my mother had put me on starting when I was 10 years old. Every time my father had sighed and said, "If only you could lose weight, Margaret, you'd be such a beautiful girl." Every time Robert had compared me unfavorably to thinner women. Every clothing store I had walked into, hopefully only to leave in shame when nothing fit. Every airplane seat that had been too small. Every restaurant booth I couldn't fit into. Every doctor who had blamed every health issue I ever had on my weight without bothering to actually examine me or listen to my symptoms. I thought about my daughter, Rebecca, who was now 45 and had inherited my body type. I thought about how she had struggled with her weight her entire life, how I had watched her go through the same painful experiences I had gone through, and how I had responded by encouraging her to diet, to lose weight, to try to become smaller. I had passed on the same toxic messages I had received, perpetuating the cycle of shame and self-hatred. The guilt of that realization hit me like a physical blow. I had failed my daughter. I had failed to protect her from the same cruelty I had experienced. Worse, I had actively participated in making her feel bad about her body, all in the name of trying to help her, trying to make her life easier by getting her to conform to society's expectations. But conforming hadn't made my life easier. It had made me miserable. As I sat there on that bench in Central Park, watching people pass by, joggers and mothers with strollers and tourists taking photographs, I felt something beginning to shift inside me. The grief was still there, heavy and painful, but it was being joined by something else. Anger. Not the quick flash of anger I had felt that morning, but something deeper and more sustained. A slow-burning fury at the injustice of it all. Why should I have to accept being treated this way? Why should any woman have to accept it? What gave that conductor the right to publicly humiliate me? What gave anyone the right to treat another human being with such casual cruelty? And why had I spent my entire life believing that I somehow deserved this treatment, that my body size made me less worthy of respect and dignity? I pulled out my phone, something I rarely used for anything other than calling my children or checking the weather. My hands were shaking slightly as I unlocked it. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I needed to do something. I couldn't just let this go, couldn't just add it to the pile of humiliations I had learned to live with. I opened the browser and searched for the Metropolitan Transportation Authority's website. It took me a while to navigate it, my technological skills being limited, but eventually I found what I was looking for: a complaint form. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty fields on my phone screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to close the browser and forget about it. That was the old Margaret, the one who didn't want to make trouble, who didn't want to be difficult, who believed she should just accept mistreatment with grace and move on. But another part of me, a part I hadn't known existed until that morning, was tired of being quiet. Was tired of protecting the feelings of people who clearly had no concern for mine. Was tired of making myself small to make others comfortable. I started typing. I described what had happened that morning in detail: the time, the bus route, the conductor's appearance, his exact words, the reaction of the other passengers. My fingers moved slowly across the small keyboard, but I was determined to get every detail right. This was important. This mattered. When I finished, I read over what I had written. It was clear and factual, without emotion or exaggeration. I hit submit before I could talk myself out of it, and then I sat back against the bench, feeling strangely drained and energized at the same time. I had done something. It might not lead anywhere, might not change anything, but I had refused to stay silent. For the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself, even if it was only through a complaint form on a website. As I sat there in the cold February air, I had no idea that this small act of defiance would set off a chain of events that would not only bring justice for what had happened to me, but would ultimately transform my entire life. I couldn't have known that within days, that conductor would face consequences for his cruelty, or that my story would resonate with thousands of people across New York City and beyond. All I knew in that moment was that something fundamental had shifted inside me, and there was no going back to the woman I had been that morning. As I finally stood up from the bench, my knees stiff from sitting in the cold, and began the slow walk back to my apartment, memories started flooding back. Memories I had spent years trying to suppress, trying to forget, trying to convince myself didn't matter. But they did matter. They had always mattered. And now, in the wake of this morning's humiliation, they came rushing back with vivid clarity. I remembered being 12 years old, standing in the girls' locker room at my junior high school in Brooklyn. We were changing for gym class, and a group of girls I had thought were my friends started making pig noises when I took off my shirt. They laughed, and the gym teacher, who had heard everything, did nothing. She simply looked away, pretending she hadn't noticed, leaving me to face that cruelty alone. I ran into a bathroom stall and stayed there for the entire class period, crying silently so no one would hear me. I remembered my junior prom when I was 16. I had been so excited because a boy named Tommy had asked me to go with him. I spent weeks helping my mother make my dress because we couldn't afford to buy one, and none of the stores carried anything in my size anyway. The night of the prom, I overheard Tommy's friends talking. They had dared him to ask me as a joke. "Take the fat girl to prom," they had said. "It'll be hilarious." I went anyway, my pride not allowing me to stay home, but I spent the entire evening wishing I could disappear. I remembered my wedding day, which should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I had finally found a seamstress who could make me a beautiful wedding dress, and I felt lovely in it. But at the reception, Robert's mother had pulled me aside and said, with what she clearly thought was kindness, "You know, dear, Robert really is taking a chance on you. The least you could do is try to lose weight now that you're married. Men don't like their wives letting themselves go." It hadn't occurred to her that I wasn't letting myself go. This was simply who I was. But her words planted a seed of anxiety that would grow throughout my marriage. The constant fear that Robert would realize he had made a mistake, that he would leave me for someone thinner, someone better. I remembered when I was pregnant with my son, David, and I went to see my obstetrician for a checkup. I had been experiencing severe abdominal pain, and I was worried something might be wrong with the baby. The doctor barely examined me before saying, "Well, what do you expect? You're obese. Everything is harder when you're that size. You should have lost weight before getting pregnant." He never did figure out what was causing the pain. It turned out I had gallstones, but by the time another doctor finally diagnosed it correctly, I had suffered for months unnecessarily. I remembered birthday parties I wasn't invited to because the hosts didn't want their nice furniture damaged by someone my size. Job interviews where I could see the disappointment in the interviewer's eyes the moment I walked through the door, where I didn't get positions I was more than qualified for because someone my size wouldn't represent the company image well. Family gatherings where relatives felt entitled to comment on everything. I ate, monitoring my plate as if it was their business, offering unsolicited diet advice as if I had asked for their input or their concern. I remembered taking my children to an amusement park when they were young. David must have been about 8 and Rebecca was 6. They were so excited to ride the roller coaster, and I wanted to ride with them to share that experience. But when we got to the front of the line, the attendant looked me up and down and said, loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I don't think you're going to fit in the seat, ma'am. Maybe you should sit this one out." The humiliation of having to walk back down the exit ramp while my children's excited faces fell, while other parents in line stared and whispered. Robert ended up taking them on the ride while I waited below. and I could see even from the ground how embarrassed David was, how he didn't want to look at me when they got off. I remembered doctor's appointments where physicians refused to treat my actual complaints and instead lectured me about weight loss. It didn't matter what I came in for, a sinus infection, a sprained ankle, a persistent cough. Every ailment was blamed on my weight, and every visit ended with a lecture about diet and exercise, with pamphlets about weight loss surgery, with shame and judgment instead of actual medical care. I eventually stopped going to the doctor unless absolutely necessary, which meant conditions went untreated and small problems became bigger ones. I remembered shopping for clothes, an experience that never got easier no matter how many times I did it, walking into a store hopefully, looking for something nice to wear to a friend's daughter's wedding, or just a comfortable pair of pants. The salespeople who would look at me and immediately say, "We don't carry your size," sometimes with barely concealed disgust, sometimes with pity that felt even worse. The stores that did carry plus sizes but relegated them to a dark corner in the back, as if fat women's clothing needed to be hidden away. The limited options, the assumption that women my size didn't care about fashion or beauty, that we would be grateful for anything that simply covered our bodies. I remembered airplane trips, each one a source of anxiety and humiliation. The way other passengers' faces would fall when they realized they had to sit next to me. The times I had been asked to buy a second seat, the times flight attendants had made comments about whether I could fit in the bathroom or whether I needed a seatbelt extender. The whispered complaints, the rolled eyes, the heavy sighs, as if my very presence was an inconvenience to everyone around me. I remembered theater visits where the seats were too small and too close together, where I would spend entire performances in physical pain, unable to move or adjust, my body compressed into a space not designed for me. Restaurant booths I couldn't fit into, chairs that groaned under my weight, or sometimes even broke. Each incident a fresh humiliation, a reminder that the world wasn't built for bodies like mine. Walking through Manhattan that afternoon, these memories cascaded through my mind like a waterfall. Each one had been painful in the moment, and I had dealt with them by minimizing them, by telling myself they weren't that bad, by convincing myself that the problem was me, not the cruelty of others. I had turned all that pain inward, converted it into self-hatred, used it as fuel for countless diets and weight loss attempts that never worked long-term and only made me feel worse about myself. But now, in the aftermath of this morning's incident on the bus, I was seeing all these memories in a new light. They weren't individual, isolated incidents that I had somehow brought upon myself through the sin of being fat. They were part of a pattern, a systemic problem, a society-wide failure to treat people in larger bodies with basic human dignity and respect. I wasn't the problem. I had never been the problem. The problem was a culture that had decided that people like me were acceptable targets for mockery, discrimination, and cruelty. The problem was a world that valued thinness above humanity, that believed your worth as a person was directly tied to your body size. The problem was decades of messaging that told fat people, especially fat women, that we should be ashamed of ourselves, that we should make ourselves as invisible as possible, that we should accept mistreatment as the natural consequence of our failure to be thin. By the time I reached my apartment building on 75th Street, I felt different than I had that morning. The shame and humiliation were still there, but they were being crowded out by something stronger. Anger, yes, but also clarity. A clear-eyed understanding that I had been wronged, not just that morning, but throughout my entire life. And with that clarity came a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in decades. If I could see the truth now, if I could recognize the injustice, maybe I could do something about it. Maybe it wasn't too late to change, to become someone who didn't accept mistreatment, who stood up for herself and for others like her. I didn't know yet what that would look like or where it would lead. But as I rode the elevator up to my fourth-floor apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope and determination. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being silent. I was done making myself small. I was done apologizing for taking up space in the world. The old Margaret Sullivan had stepped onto that bus this morning. But a new Margaret Sullivan was emerging, and she was ready to fight. I spent the evening in my apartment doing something I rarely allowed myself to do, sitting with my feelings instead of trying to distract myself from them. I didn't turn on the television, didn't pick up a book, didn't call one of my friends for our usual chat. Instead, I sat in my favorite armchair by the window, looking out at the lights of Manhattan, and I thought deeply about my life and who I wanted to be for whatever time I had left. 72 years old. That's not young, and I was acutely aware of my mortality in a way I hadn't been even a year ago. My knees were bad, my blood pressure was high, I had aches and pains that were just part of getting older. How much time did I have left? 10 years? 20 if I was lucky? However long it was, did I want to spend it the same way I had spent the last 7 decades? Quiet, compliant, invisible, accepting whatever cruelty came my way with the resigned belief that I somehow deserved it? The answer was so clear it almost made me laugh. No, absolutely not. Not anymore. I thought about my children. David was 47 now, living in Seattle with his wife and 2 teenage sons. He was a software engineer, successful and busy, and we spoke maybe once a week if he remembered to call. Our relationship was cordial, but not particularly close. I had always sensed that he was slightly embarrassed by me, though he would never admit it. When he was younger, I had seen how he would tense up when I came to his school events, how he would position himself so his friends wouldn't see us together, how he would make excuses for why I couldn't come to certain activities, and Rebecca, my daughter, 45 and living in Austin, Texas. She had followed in my footsteps more than I ever wanted her to. She was plus size like me, and she had inherited not just my body type, but also my shame about it. She had been dieting since she was a teenager, the same way I had. She had learned from me that her worth was tied to the number on the scale, that she needed to constantly apologize for her body, that she should make herself smaller in every way. I had done that to her. I had passed on that terrible legacy, and the guilt of it sat heavy on my chest. What kind of example had I been for my children? I had taught them, through my actions if not my words, that it was okay for people to treat you badly, that you should accept disrespect and cruelty without protest, that your own needs and feelings mattered less than keeping the peace and not making waves. That was the legacy I was leaving, and the realization made me feel sick. But it wasn't too late to change that legacy. It wasn't too late to show them, especially Rebecca, that there was another way to live. That you could be fat and still demand respect. That you could take up space unapologetically. That you could fight back against injustice. I might be 72 years old, but I could still model a different way of being in the world. I thought about my late husband Robert and our marriage. He hadn't been a bad man, not really. He had provided for our family, he had been faithful, he had shown up for important events. But he had also made me feel small in countless ways over our 38 years together. The comments about my weight, the subtle and not so subtle ways he let me know I wasn't quite good enough, the times he had taken other people's side when they were cruel to me about my size. I remembered once. We had been at a company dinner for his accounting firm. One of his colleagues, a man I had met several times before, made a joke about having enough to eat while looking pointedly at me. Robert had laughed along with everyone else. When I told him later that night how hurt I had been, he had said, "Oh, Margaret, don't be so sensitive." He was just joking. You need to learn to laugh at yourself. Learn to laugh at yourself. Translation: accept humiliation gracefully. Don't make other people uncomfortable by pointing out their cruelty. I had accepted that. I had swallowed my hurt and my anger and convinced myself that Robert was right, that I was being too sensitive. How many times had I done that? How many times had I taken cruelty and repackaged it in my mind as something I needed to tolerate, something I had brought upon myself, something I had no right to complain about? The more I sat with these thoughts, the angrier I became. Not a helpless, destructive anger, but a clarifying one. An anger that burned away the fog of self-doubt and revealed the truth clearly. I had been wronged. Over and over again, throughout my entire life, I had been wronged. And I had been complicit in my own mistreatment by accepting it, by internalizing the messages that I was somehow less worthy of respect because of my body size. Around 9 o'clock that evening, my phone rang. It was Rebecca. We talked most Wednesday evenings, a routine we had established after Robert died. Usually these calls were pleasant but superficial. We would talk about her work as a teacher, about her husband and their 2 children, about the weather and what we had been watching on television. Safe topics that didn't require us to go too deep or reveal too much. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the emotional rawness I was feeling, or maybe it was the realization that I had been failing my daughter for her entire life by not modeling self-respect and self-love. Whatever the reason, when Rebecca asked her usual question, "So how are you, Mom?" I found myself telling her the truth. I told her about what had happened on the bus that morning. I described the conductor's cruelty in detail, the laughter of the passengers, the deep humiliation I had felt. And then I told her something I had never told her before. I told her about all the other times I had experienced similar cruelty, about the lifetime of mistreatment I had endured and accepted. I told her about the memories that had been flooding back all day. I told her how I had finally filed a complaint, how I had decided I wasn't going to be silent anymore. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I worried for a moment that I had said too much, that I had made her uncomfortable. But then I heard something that broke my heart. Rebecca was crying. "Mom," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I had no idea. I mean, I knew you struggled with your weight, but I didn't know. I didn't realize how much you had been through. And the thing is, I've been through so much of the same stuff. I just thought it was normal. I thought it was just part of being, like us. Like us. Fat." She couldn't even say the word, and I understood why. I had taught her that it was a word to be ashamed of, a word to avoid at all costs. "Rebecca," I said, and my voice was stronger than it had been in years. "It's not normal. It shouldn't be normal, and I'm so sorry that I never taught you that. I'm sorry that I let you think, the way I thought, that we deserve to be treated badly because of our bodies. We don't deserve it. Nobody deserves it." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was small, like she was a little girl again. "Do you remember when I was in 5th grade, and those boys in my class started calling me Rebecca the refrigerator? And I came home crying, and you told me that if I just lost some weight, they would stop teasing me? I did remember. The memory hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had said that. I had taken my daughter's pain and turned it back on her, made it her responsibility to change herself, to stop the bullying, rather than recognizing that the bullies were the problem. I had done exactly what had been done to me, perpetuating the cycle. "I remember," I said quietly. "And Rebecca, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Those boys were cruel, and it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. And I should have told you that. I should have told you that you were perfect exactly as you were, that your body was fine, that the problem was with people who thought they had the right to mock you. But I didn't know that then. I didn't believe it myself. I'm only just starting to believe it now." We talked for over 2 hours that night, the longest and deepest conversation we had ever had. Rebecca told me things she had never shared before, about the eating disorder she had struggled with in college, the diet pills that had made her heart race, the extreme exercise routines that had injured her knees. She told me about the job interview where the hiring manager had told her she didn't fit their wellness-focused company culture. She told me about the comments her mother-in-law made about her weight, about the doctor who had refused to treat her severe endometriosis until she lost 50 pounds, about the everyday indignities and cruelties that had shaped her life just as they had shaped mine. And I told her about my decision that I wasn't going to accept this treatment anymore. I told her that I had filed a complaint against the bus conductor, that I didn't know if anything would come of it, but that it felt important to take that stand. I told her that I was done being quiet, done apologizing for my body, done making myself small to make others comfortable. "Mom," Rebecca said, and there was something in her voice I had never heard before, something like admiration. "You're 72 years old, and you're just now learning to stand up for yourself. I don't know if that's inspiring or heartbreaking. Maybe it's both," I said. "But the important thing is that I'm learning, and maybe you can learn it too, 40 years younger than I did. Maybe you can teach your daughter, my granddaughter, so she never has to learn it at all. Maybe we can break this cycle." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, looking out at the city lights, and I felt something shift in my chest. It was like a door opening, like fresh air rushing into a room that had been sealed shut for decades. I felt lighter somehow, despite my body size, lighter in my spirit than I had felt in my entire life. The conversation with Rebecca had crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her, about my granddaughter, about all the other women out there who were living the way I had lived, believing they deserved cruelty, accepting mistreatment as the price of existing in a larger body. If I could change, if I could stand up for myself, maybe it would give them permission to do the same. Maybe my small act of filing that complaint could ripple outward in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was too full, too active, processing 72 years of accumulated pain and beginning to imagine a different future. Around 3 a.m, I got up and made myself a cup of tea, and I did something I hadn't done since I was a young woman. I wrote in a journal. I wrote about the incident on the bus. I wrote about all the memories that had come flooding back. I wrote about my conversation with Rebecca, and then I wrote something that surprised me, even as the words flowed from my pen. I am 72 years old, and I am done apologizing for existing. I am done accepting cruelty as the price of having a fat body. I am done being silent. Whatever time I have left, I'm going to spend it fighting for myself, for my daughter, for every woman who has been told she is less than because she doesn't fit into society's narrow definition of acceptable. I don't know what that fight will look like yet, but I know it starts with refusing to be silent anymore. As the first light of dawn began to brighten the Manhattan skyline, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, excitement about the future. Yes, I was an elderly woman with bad knees and limited mobility. Yes, I had spent most of my life being quiet and compliant. Yes, I had no experience with activism or standing up for myself or making waves. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that I had finally decided that enough was enough. I had finally decided that I deserved better. And that decision, that moment of reflection and clarity, was going to change everything. The next morning, Thursday, I woke up feeling different. The shame and humiliation from the bus incident were still there, but they had been joined by something stronger: determination. I had spent Wednesday evening and half the night processing 72 years of accumulated pain, and now, in the clear light of Thursday morning, I was ready to take action. I made myself breakfast oatmeal with blueberries and a cup of coffee and sat at my small kitchen table with my phone. I had submitted the complaint to the MTA on Wednesday afternoon, but I didn't know if that would be enough. I didn't know if anyone would even read it, let alone take it seriously. Bureaucracies were good at ignoring complaints, especially complaints from people like me. People who society had already decided didn't matter as much. But then I remembered something Rebecca had said during our conversation last night. She had mentioned social media, how stories that gained traction online could force organizations to pay attention in ways that formal complaints sometimes didn't. I wasn't on social media. I had always felt too self-conscious, too aware that the internet could be a cruel place for women my size. But maybe it was time to change that too. I opened my phone's browser and searched for how to create a Twitter account. It took me a while to figure out the process: choosing a username, setting up a profile, understanding how the platform worked. I decided to call myself Margaret Speaks Up because that's what I was finally doing, speaking up. For my first tweet, I wanted to be clear and factual. I wanted people to understand what had happened without being sensational about it. I typed carefully, my fingers slow on the small keyboard. I'm 72 years old. Yesterday, a bus conductor on the M15 in Manhattan called me an old fat pig in front of all the passengers. People laughed. I've been silent about this kind of treatment my whole life. Not anymore. Stop fat phobia. Respect for all. I read it over 3 times before I hit the tweet button. My heart was pounding as if I had just done something dangerous. In a way, I had. I had made my humiliation public. I had opened myself up to more cruelty, more mockery. But I had also taken a stand, and that felt important. I didn't expect anything to happen immediately. I had 0 followers after all, and I was new to the platform. So I was shocked when, within an hour, my tweet had gotten 5 likes and 2 retweets. Within 2 hours, it had 20 likes. By lunchtime, it had over 100, and people were starting to comment. Most of the comments were supportive. People sharing their own stories of discrimination and cruelty. Other plus-size women saying they had experienced similar treatment. People expressing outrage that a public employee would behave so unprofessionally. But there were also cruel comments, people telling me I deserved it, that if I didn't want to be called a pig, I should lose weight, that I was taking up too much space and inconveniencing everyone else. Those comments stung, but they also reinforced why I was doing this. This wasn't just about one bus conductor. This was about a systemic problem, a culture that thought it was acceptable to treat fat people as less than human. Around 2 o'clock, my phone rang. It was a New York City area code I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello, is this Margaret Sullivan?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes." "This is she," I said cautiously. "Ms. Sullivan, my name is Jennifer Martinez, and I'm a reporter with the New York Daily News. I saw your tweet about the incident on the M15 bus, and I was wondering if you would be willing to talk to me about what happened." A reporter from a major newspaper. My first instinct was to say no, to protect my privacy, to avoid making a bigger deal out of this than it already was. That was the old Margaret, the one who didn't want to cause trouble. But the new Margaret, the one who was done being silent, heard herself saying, "Yes, I'd be willing to talk to you." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near my apartment in an hour. After I hung up, I sat there for a moment, slightly stunned by how quickly things were moving. I had filed a complaint less than 24 hours ago. I had sent my first tweet just this morning, and now a newspaper reporter wanted to interview me. I changed into a nice blouse and cardigan, put on a bit of makeup, and walked the 3 blocks to the coffee shop. Jennifer Martinez was already there, a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. She stood up when I approached and shook my hand warmly. "Thank you so much for meeting with me, Ms. Sullivan," she said. "Can I get you a coffee?" We ordered our drinks, a cappuccino for her, a hot chocolate for me, and settled into a corner table where we could talk privately. Jennifer pulled out a notebook and a recording device and asked if I minded being recorded. I said I didn't, though my hands were shaking slightly as I wrapped them around my warm mug. "So," Jennifer said gently, "tell me what happened on Tuesday morning." And I did. I told her everything, from the moment I stepped onto the bus to the conductor's cruel comments, to the laughter of the passengers, to how I had felt standing there, humiliated and powerless. I told her about filing the complaint, about deciding I couldn't stay silent anymore. Jennifer listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression sympathetic but professional. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Ms. Sullivan, I have to tell you, this story really resonates with me. I've been covering issues of discrimination and social justice for years, and fat phobia is one of those issues that doesn't get nearly enough attention. People think it's acceptable to be cruel to fat people in ways they would never be cruel to people based on other characteristics." "That's exactly right," I said, feeling validated in a way I had rarely experienced. It's one of the last socially acceptable forms of discrimination. People feel entitled to comment on fat people's bodies, to police what we eat, to make assumptions about our health and our character based solely on our size. And we're expected to just accept it. "Well," Jennifer said, "I think your story could help change that conversation. Would you be comfortable if I wrote an article about this? I'd like to include your full name and photograph if possible, but I understand if you'd prefer to remain anonymous." I thought about it for a moment. Using my full name and photograph would make me vulnerable. It would open me up to more cruelty, more judgment. But it would also make the story more powerful, more real. It would show that I wasn't ashamed, that I was willing to stand behind my words. "You can use my name and photograph," I said. "I'm done hiding," Jennifer smiled. "I think you're incredibly brave, Ms. Sullivan. Would you mind if I took a photo of you now?" She took several photographs of me sitting in the coffee shop, and then we talked for another hour. She asked me about my life, about my experiences as a plus-size woman, about what I hoped would come from speaking out. I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't expected, sharing stories I had never told anyone, expressing feelings I had kept buried for decades. As we were wrapping up, Jennifer said, "I'm going to try to get this article published as soon as possible. Hopefully by tomorrow. I'll also reach out to the MTA for comment." These kinds of stories can sometimes create real momentum for change. After Jennifer left, I sat in the coffee shop for a while longer, processing what had just happened. I had just given an interview to a major newspaper. My story was going to be published for potentially millions of people to read. The private humiliation I had experienced on that bus was about to become very public. I felt scared. I felt exposed. But I also felt something else, proud. Proud that I was finally standing up for myself. Proud that maybe, just maybe, my willingness to speak out could help other women who had experienced similar treatment feel less alone, feel empowered to demand better for themselves. I pulled out my phone and checked my Twitter account. My original tweet now had over 500 likes and had been retweeted more than 100 times. People were sharing it, commenting on it, adding their own stories. A conversation was starting, and I had sparked it. I tweeted again, "Thank you to everyone who has shared their stories and shown support. We deserve respect regardless of our body size. Change starts when we refuse to stay silent. Stop fat phobia." Then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I called my son David. We hadn't spoken in about 2 weeks, which was normal for us. Our relationship had always been somewhat distant, cordial, but not particularly close. But I felt like I needed to tell him what was happening before he read about it in the news. "Hi, Mom," he said when he answered, and I could hear the slight surprise in his voice. I usually waited for him to call me. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. "Actually, everything's more than fine. I need to tell you about something that happened, and about something I'm doing about it." I told him the story, much as I had told Jennifer. I told him about the bus conductor, about filing the complaint, about the tweet, about the interview. I told him about deciding that I wasn't going to accept this kind of treatment anymore. There was a long silence when I finished. Then David said, "Mom, are you sure you want to do this? I mean, putting yourself out there like that. People can be really cruel online. You're going to get a lot of negative attention." "I know," I said. "I'm already getting some. But David, I've been accepting cruel treatment my entire life. I've been quiet and compliant and invisible. And what has that gotten me? Nothing but a lifetime of pain and shame. I'm 72 years old, and I'm finally done apologizing for existing." Another silence. Then, in a quieter voice, David said, "I'm sorry, Mom." "Sorry for what?" For being part of the problem, I guess. For being embarrassed by you sometimes when I was growing up. For not standing up for you when other people were cruel. For making you feel like you needed to make yourself smaller. I didn't realize. I never thought about what it must have been like for you. Tears sprang to my eyes. I had never expected this, never thought David had even been aware of how he had treated me, let alone that he would apologize for it. "Thank you," I said. "That means more to me than you know." "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I mean it. What you're doing takes real courage." After we hung up, I walked home slowly, my mind whirling with everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. 2 days ago, I had been the same woman I had been for 72 years, quiet, compliant, accepting of mistreatment. Now, I was someone who had filed a complaint, started a social media account, given an interview to a newspaper, and was about to become the public face of resistance to fat phobia. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was just the beginning. And you, a plus-size woman who is watching, have you been through something similar? Tell us in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more empowerment stories. Friday morning, I woke up to find that my life had changed overnight. Jennifer Martinez's article had been published on the front page of the New York Daily News website, with the headline, "72-year-old woman speaks out after bus conductor's cruel attack." There was my photograph, taken in the coffee shop, looking back at me from the screen of my phone. I read the article with trembling hands. Jennifer had written it beautifully, capturing not just the incident on the bus, but also the broader context of discrimination that plus-size people face every day. She had included quotes from me about my lifetime of experiencing fat phobia, about my decision to finally speak up, about my hope that sharing my story could help others. The article also included a statement from the MTA. They said they were taking the complaint very seriously, and that they were conducting a full investigation into the incident. They emphasized that all MTA employees are expected to treat passengers with respect and dignity, and that discriminatory behavior of any kind will not be tolerated. I sat at my kitchen table, reading and rereading the article, hardly able to believe this was my life. But what happened next was even more overwhelming. The article had been shared on social media, and my Twitter account had exploded overnight. I now had thousands of followers. Thousands of people had liked and retweeted my posts. My phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Most of the responses were supportive and encouraging. Plus-size women from all over the country, from all over the world, were sharing their own stories, expressing solidarity, thanking me for speaking up. I read through message after message, my heart aching as I recognized my own experiences reflected in theirs. A woman in Chicago wrote about being told she couldn't sit in a restaurant booth because she might break it. A woman in London described being denied service at a spa because they weren't equipped to handle clients of her size. A woman in São Paulo talked about being humiliated at a job interview when the interviewer made pig noises at her. A woman in Sydney recounted being refused medical treatment for a serious condition until she lost weight. On and on the stories came, a tidal wave of shared pain and collective experience. But there were also cruel messages. People telling me I was ugly, that I was unhealthy, that I deserved what had happened to me, that I was promoting obesity, that I should just lose weight if I didn't want to be treated badly. Some people sent me hateful images, doctored photographs of me, cruel memes. The cruelty was shocking in its viciousness, in its complete lack of empathy. The old Margaret would have been crushed by those hateful messages. She would have taken them to heart, would have used them as evidence that she deserved mistreatment, would have retreated back into silence and invisibility. But something was different now. Those cruel messages didn't have the power over me that they once would have had. Instead of internalizing them, I recognized them for what they were. Evidence of the exact problem I was speaking out against. These people felt entitled to be cruel to me because of my body size. They felt justified in their hatred, and that was exactly why this conversation needed to happen. I decided to respond publicly to some of the cruelty. I tweeted, "For everyone sending hateful messages, your cruelty proves exactly why this conversation is necessary. Fat people deserve respect. Our bodies don't justify your hatred. Stop fat phobia." That tweet went viral almost immediately, getting thousands of likes and retweets within hours. People were sharing it, adding their own comments of support, calling out the culture of fat phobia. I was inadvertently starting a movement, and I had no idea how to handle it. Around noon, my phone rang. It was another unfamiliar number, and I was hesitant to answer, worried it might be a reporter from one of the cruel tabloids or someone calling to harass me. But I answered anyway. "Ms. Sullivan, this is Marcus Johnson from Good Morning America. We would love to have you on the show to talk about your experience and the response you've been getting. Would you be available to come to our studio on Monday morning?" Good Morning America, one of the biggest morning shows in the country. My mind went blank for a moment, unable to process what he was asking. Yes, I heard myself saying. Yes, I would be available. We worked out the details, and after I hung up, I sat there in stunned silence. I was going to be on national television. Me, Margaret Sullivan, the woman who had spent her entire life trying to be invisible, was going to be on Good Morning America. The phone calls kept coming throughout the day. Local news stations wanting interviews. National magazines wanting to feature my story. Advocacy organizations reaching out to thank me and offer support. A literary agent calling to ask if I had ever considered writing a book. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. But perhaps the most meaningful call came late in the afternoon. It was from someone at the MTA, a supervisor in the Human Resources Department. "Ms. Sullivan, I'm calling to inform you that we have completed our preliminary investigation into your complaint," she said, her voice professional but warm. "Based on the evidence we've gathered, including security camera footage from the bus and statements from several passengers who corroborated your account, we have determined that the conductor's behavior was completely unacceptable and in violation of MTA policies." "What does that mean?" I asked, my heart racing. "It means that the conductor in question has been suspended without pay, pending a full disciplinary hearing, which will likely result in termination. Additionally, all MTA employees will be required to undergo sensitivity training, regarding discrimination and appropriate treatment of passengers. Your courage in speaking up is going to result in real changes to how we train and manage our employees. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Real consequences, real changes. Because I had refused to stay silent. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for taking this seriously." After I hung up, I immediately tweeted the update. The MTA has suspended the bus conductor and is implementing sensitivity training for all employees. Speaking up works. Don't stay silent in the face of discrimination. To stop fat phobia and change. That tweet exploded across social media. Major news outlets picked it up. It became a trending topic not just in New York but nationally. By evening, I had over 50,000 followers on Twitter, and the hashtag #StopFatPhobia was being used tens of thousands of times. I received a text from Rebecca. "Mom, I just saw the news. I can't believe this is happening. You're actually changing things. I'm so proud of you I can't even put it into words." I also received a text from David. "Mom, you're all over the news. My colleagues at work have been talking about it. You're inspiring so many people. Love you." As I sat in my apartment that evening, looking at the Manhattan skyline, I marveled at how much my life had changed in just 3 days. On Tuesday morning, I had been humiliated on a bus, feeling powerless and alone. Now, on Friday evening, I was a voice for change. Someone who had sparked a national conversation about respect and dignity for plus-size people. But more than that, I had discovered something about myself that I hadn't known existed. Inner strength. Real, powerful, unshakable strength. For 72 years, I had believed I was weak, that I needed to make myself smaller and quieter to survive in a world that didn't want me as I was. But I had been wrong. The strength had always been there, buried under layers of shame and self-hatred, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And now that it had emerged, I knew there was no going back. I had tasted what it felt like to stand up for myself, to refuse to accept mistreatment, to use my voice to create change. And it felt better than anything I had ever experienced. It felt like finally, after 7 decades, I was becoming the person I was always meant to be. The weekend passed in a blur of activity. I spent Saturday preparing for my Good Morning America appearance on Monday, working with a media coach that one of the advocacy organizations had connected me with. Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s who specialized in helping people prepare for television interviews, came to my apartment Saturday afternoon. "The most important thing," she told me as we sat in my living room, "is to stay focused on your message. The interviewers might try to steer the conversation toward your health or your weight, but what you're really talking about is dignity and respect. Keep bringing it back to that." We practiced answering common questions, worked on my talking points, discussed how to handle potentially hostile or insensitive questions. Sarah was patient and encouraging, and by the time she left Saturday evening, I felt more confident about the upcoming interview. But preparing for the interview wasn't the only thing I did that weekend. On Saturday morning before Sarah arrived, I did something I hadn't done in over 40 years. I went shopping for clothes that I actually wanted to wear. Not just clothes that would hide my body or allow me to disappear into the background. There was a plus-size boutique in Soho that I had walked past many times but never entered. It was called Curves and Confidence, and the window displays always featured beautiful clothes on plus-size mannequins, styled in ways that celebrated larger bodies rather than trying to minimize them. I had always been too intimidated to go inside, too convinced that I didn't deserve beautiful things, that I should stick to the dark, shapeless clothes I had worn for decades. But this Saturday morning, I walked through that door. A bell chimed as I entered, and a young sales associate looked up from the register and smiled warmly. "Welcome to Curves and Confidence. I'm Jasmine. Is there anything I can help you find today? I need something to wear for a television interview," I said. And then, surprising myself, I added, "Something that makes me feel powerful." Jasmine's smile widened. "Oh, we can absolutely do that. What's your style? What colors do you like? What kind of message do you want to send?" For the next hour, Jasmine helped me try on different outfits. Not shapeless black tunics designed to hide my body, but beautifully tailored blazers in jewel tones, elegant blouses with interesting details, pants that actually fit properly and looked stylish. She treated me with such respect and enthusiasm, never once suggesting that I should wear something to minimize or camouflage my size. Instead, she talked about what colors brought out my eyes, what cuts highlighted my best features, what styles made me feel confident. I ended up buying a beautiful emerald green blazer with matching pants, along with a cream-colored silk blouse. When I looked at myself in the dressing room mirror, I hardly recognized the woman looking back at me. I looked powerful. I looked confident. I looked like someone who demanded respect. "You look absolutely stunning," Jasmine said. "Whatever this interview is about, you're going to kill it." "Thank you," I said, and then I made a decision. "Actually, can I ask you something? Would you mind if I took a photo here in the store and posted it on social media? I've been speaking out about fat phobia this week, and I think it's important to show that plus-size women can be stylish and confident." "Are you kidding?" Jasmine said, her eyes lighting up. "That would be amazing. We would be honored." She helped me take several photos, and I chose the best one to post on Twitter. In the photo, I was standing in front of a mirror wearing my new emerald green outfit, smiling confidently. I captioned it, "At 72, I'm done hiding my body in shapeless clothes. I deserve to wear things that make me feel powerful and beautiful. Every fat woman does. Thank you, our curves and confidence, for treating me with respect and style. Stop fat phobia. Fashion for everybody." The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the tweet had tens of thousands of likes. Plus-size women were commenting about how inspiring it was to see an older woman embracing her body. Curves and Confidence's business exploded. Their website crashed from all the traffic, and they had to hire extra staff to handle the sudden increase in customers. Jasmine messaged me privately to thank me, saying that my post had brought them more business in one day than they usually got in a month. But the most meaningful response came from my granddaughter, Emma, Rebecca's daughter. She was 16 years old and had inherited the family body type. Rebecca had mentioned that Emma was struggling with body image issues, the same way Rebecca had struggled, the same way I had struggled. Emma sent me a direct message on Twitter. "Grandma, I saw your tweet and the photo of you in that outfit. You look so beautiful and confident. I've been so ashamed of my body, trying to make myself smaller, wearing only black clothes, avoiding mirrors. But seeing you stand up for yourself and embrace who you are is making me think that maybe I don't have to hate myself. Maybe it's okay to be the size I am. Thank you for being brave. I love you." I read that message 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This was why I was doing this. Not for fame or attention, not even primarily for myself, but for women like Emma, like Rebecca, like all the plus-size girls and women who had been taught to hate themselves, who had internalized the message that their bodies were wrong and shameful. I responded to Emma, "My darling granddaughter, your body is perfect exactly as it is. I wasted 72 years being ashamed, and I don't want that for you. You deserve to take up space unapologetically, to wear whatever makes you feel beautiful, to demand respect. Don't waste your precious youth the way I did. I love you so much." Sunday was quieter, but no less meaningful. I attended services at the Catholic church I had been going to for decades. St. Monica's on the Upper East Side. I wasn't sure what kind of reception I would get. I knew some people in the congregation had seen the news stories, and I didn't know if they would approve of me making such a public spectacle. But as I walked in, something unexpected happened. People approached me, one after another, to express their support. Mrs. Kowalski, an elderly Polish woman who had always been kind to me, hugged me tightly and said, "I saw you on the news, Margaret. You're doing a good thing. You're standing up for people who don't have a voice." Father Mike, the priest, mentioned my situation in his homily without using my name. He talked about the dignity of every human person, about how we're all made in God's image regardless of our body size, about the importance of standing up against cruelty and discrimination. After the service, he pulled me aside. "Margaret," he said, "what you're doing is important work. It's Christ's work, really standing up for the marginalized, speaking truth to power, demanding that people be treated with the dignity they deserve. I want you to know that I'm praying for you and that this church community supports you. I felt so moved by his words, by the support of my church community. For so long I had felt ashamed even in church, as if my body size was some kind of moral failing. But Father Mike's words reminded me that my worth as a person, my value in God's eyes, had nothing to do with my weight. That afternoon, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I went to Central Park and just walked, not hurrying, not trying to exercise or burn calories, just walking slowly and enjoying the February sunshine. My knees hurt, and I had to stop frequently to rest on benches, but I didn't care. I was taking up space, existing in public, refusing to hide away. As I sat on a bench near Bethesda Fountain, a young woman approached me hesitantly. She was plus size, probably in her late 20s, and she looked nervous. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Margaret Sullivan? From the news?" "I am," I said, smiling at her. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "I saw your interviews and your tweets, and you're giving me courage. I've been so afraid to speak up when people are cruel to me, so afraid to take up space, so ashamed of my body. But watching you stand up for yourself is making me think that maybe I can too." "What's your name?" I asked. "Olivia. Olivia, you absolutely can stand up for yourself. You deserve respect, not because you might lose weight someday, or because you're trying to change yourself, but because you're a human being right now, exactly as you are. Don't wait until you're 72 to realize that, the way I did." Olivia started crying, and I stood up and hugged her. We stood there in Central Park, two plus-size women embracing, both of us crying, both of us experiencing a moment of connection and understanding that went beyond words. After Olivia left, I sat back down on the bench and thought about how much my life had changed in just 5 days. 5 days ago, I had been humiliated on a bus and had considered just accepting it as one more in a long series of degradations. Now I was someone who strangers recognized, someone who was inspiring other women, someone who was actually making a difference. But more importantly, I was becoming someone who respected herself, someone who believed she deserved dignity and kindness, someone who refused to apologize for existing. That internal transformation was even more significant than anything happening externally. I was finally, at 72 years old, learning to love and accept myself. And that self-acceptance was radiating outward, giving other women permission to do the same. As I walked home that evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in decades. I was scared about the Good Morning America interview tomorrow, nervous about being on national television, worried about saying the wrong thing or freezing up. But I was also excited to share my message with an even wider audience, excited to continue fighting for change, excited, for the first time in my life, to be exactly who I was, unapologetically and without shame. Monday morning arrived with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I woke up at 4:30, far earlier than I needed to, unable to sleep. The Good Morning America interview was scheduled for 7:15, and a car service was picking me up at 6. I had 2.5 hours to get ready, and I used every minute of it. I showered carefully, washed and styled my gray hair, applied makeup with more attention than I usually gave it. I put on the emerald green outfit from Curves and Confidence, and when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw that same powerful woman I had seen in the store on Saturday. I took a deep breath and reminded myself of what Sarah, the media coach, had told me. You have nothing to prove to anyone. You're simply telling your truth. The car arrived promptly at 6, and during the ride to the ABC studios in Times Square, I reviewed my talking points one more time. Stay focused on dignity and respect. Don't let them make it about health or weight loss. Remember that you're speaking for all plus-size people who don't have a platform. When I arrived at the studio, I was greeted by a producer named Amanda, a cheerful woman in her 30s who walked me through what would happen. I would be interviewed by Robin Roberts, one of the main anchors. It would be a 7-minute segment. They would show a clip from the security camera, footage of the bus incident. The MTA had released it with my permission. And then Robin would ask me questions about what happened and what had happened since. The clip is hard to watch, Amanda warned me gently. Seeing yourself in that moment might bring up difficult feelings. Are you sure you're ready for this? I'm ready, I said, and I meant it. I had lived through the actual experience. I could handle watching footage of it. They took me to hair and makeup, where professionals fussed over me, touching up my makeup and making sure I looked good on camera. Then I was led to the green room to wait. I sat there, my heart pounding, watching the show on the monitor. I saw the weather forecast, a cooking segment, a story about a new movie opening, and then I heard Robin Roberts say, "When we come back." A New York woman's story of standing up to cruelty has sparked a national conversation about respect and dignity. "That's you in 2 minutes," Amanda said. And suddenly I was being ushered onto the set. The studio was both bigger and smaller than I had imagined. The cameras were enormous, and there were people everywhere, camera operators, sound technicians, producers with headsets. But the actual interview area was intimate, just 2 chairs and a small table with a vase of flowers. Robin Roberts stood up as I approached, and she shook my hand warmly. "Ms. Sullivan, thank you so much for being here," she said. "What you're doing is really important." "Thank you for having me," I managed to say. We sat down and someone clipped a small microphone to my blazer. Someone else counted down 5, 4, 3, and then we were live on national television. "I'm here with Margaret Sullivan," Robin said, looking directly into the camera. "A 72-year-old New York woman whose experience on a city bus has sparked a national conversation about fat phobia and respect." "Margaret, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me," I said. And I was pleased to hear that my voice sounded steady. "Let's start by showing our viewers what happened last Tuesday morning on a Manhattan bus." Robin turned to a monitor, and the security footage began to play. Watching it was surreal and painful. There I was, stepping onto the bus, tapping my Metro card. The footage had no sound, but I could see the conductor's mouth moving, see him laughing, see my face fall as I registered what he was saying. I could see me standing there, frozen, while other passengers turned to look. I could see the teenagers with their phones out, recording my humiliation. The footage was only about 30 seconds long, but it felt like an eternity. When it ended, Robin turned to me with an expression of genuine sympathy. "That must have been incredibly difficult to experience. Can you tell us what was going through your mind in that moment?" "I felt humiliated," I said honestly. I felt powerless, and I felt like I wanted to disappear. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to me. I've experienced this kind of cruelty my entire life because of my body size. But this time something was different. I realized I didn't want to just accept it anymore. "And so you filed a complaint with the MTA," Robin said. "I did. And I shared my story on social media. I've been silent about this kind of discrimination for 72 years, and I decided I was done being silent. I decided that I deserved respect and that every person, regardless of their body size, deserves to be treated with dignity." Robin nodded. "The response to your story has been enormous. Your tweet has been shared hundreds of thousands of times, and the hashtag #StopFatPhobia has been trending for days. Were you expecting this kind of reaction?" "Not at all," I admitted. "I'm a 72-year-old woman who just learned how to use Twitter last week. I had no idea that my story would resonate with so many people, but I think it speaks to how common this experience is. Every plus-size person watching right now has experienced similar cruelty. We've all been told that our bodies are wrong, that we deserve mistreatment, that we should be ashamed. And I think people are tired of it. They're ready for change. The MTA has suspended the bus conductor and is implementing new sensitivity training," Robin said. "Do you feel like justice has been served?" "I think it's a good start," I said carefully. "But this isn't just about one bus conductor. This is about a culture that treats fat phobia as acceptable, even funny. It's about systemic discrimination that affects healthcare, employment, fashion, public spaces, relationships, every aspect of life. One person being held accountable is important, but we need broader change." Robin leaned forward slightly. "Some people watching might say that obesity is a health issue, and that public health campaigns against obesity are justified. What would you say to them?" This was the question Sarah had warned me about, the attempt to make the conversation about health rather than respect. I took a deep breath and gave the answer we had prepared. I would say that my health is between me and my doctor, not between me and a bus conductor or anyone else who feels entitled to comment on my body. I would say that you can't tell someone's health by looking at them, and that fat people deserve respect regardless of their health status. And I would say that discrimination and cruelty don't make anyone healthier, they just cause psychological harm. If we really cared about health, we would work to create a society where all people, of all sizes, are treated with respect and have access to competent, non-discriminatory health care. I could see Robin nodding approvingly, and I felt a surge of confidence. I was doing this, I was saying what needed to be said on national television, and I was doing it well. "You've become something of an inspiration," Robin said, "especially to plus-size women. What message do you want to share with them?" I looked directly into the camera, thinking about Rebecca and Emma and Olivia from Central Park and all the women who had shared their stories with me online. "I want to say, you deserve respect right now, exactly as you are. Not after you lose weight, not when you achieve some arbitrary standard of acceptability, but right now, your body is not wrong. You don't need to apologize for existing. You don't need to make yourself smaller to make others comfortable. Stand up for yourself. Use your voice. Don't spend 72 years the way I did, believing you're less worthy of dignity because of your size. Life is too short to spend it hating yourself." "Margaret Sullivan, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story," Robin said, and I could see genuine emotion in her eyes. "You're creating important change." "Thank you," I said. And just like that, the interview was over. Amanda came to remove my microphone, and several crew members approached to thank me and tell me how powerful the interview had been. Robin gave me a hug and said, "You did beautifully. Your message is going to reach so many people." In the car on the way home, I felt drained but exhilarated. I had done it. I had spoken my truth on national television to millions of people. My hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but I felt proud of myself in a way I never had before. I pulled out my phone and saw that it was exploding with notifications. The interview clips were already circulating on social media. My Twitter following had jumped to over 200,000. Messages were pouring in from people who had watched the interview, thanking me, sharing their own stories, telling me I had given them courage. But there were also more hateful messages. More people telling me I was disgusting, that I was promoting unhealthy lifestyles, that I should be ashamed of myself. One message particularly stood out. "You're going to die early because of your obesity, and you're encouraging other people to kill themselves too. You're a monster." For a moment, that message hit me hard. The old Margaret would have internalized it, would have used it as evidence that I was doing something wrong, that I should go back to being quiet and apologetic. But the new Margaret recognized it for what it was, cruelty masquerading as concern. No one who genuinely cared about health would send such a hateful message. I responded publicly. To those sending hateful messages disguised as health concerns, you're not fooling anyone. If you actually cared about people's well-being, you would treat them with respect. Cruelty never made anyone healthier. Stop fat phobia. By the time I got home, that tweet had already been liked thousands of times. The conversation was continuing, growing, reaching more people. And I was at the center of it, no longer a victim of cruelty, but an advocate for change. The rest of Monday was a whirlwind. More interview requests came in CNN, NPR, local news stations, podcasts, magazines. I did 3 more interviews that day, each one getting easier as I became more comfortable with my message and my role as a spokesperson. But that evening, something happened that reminded me that this fight wasn't going to be easy. I received an email from the building management of my apartment complex. A neighbor had complained that my controversial public statements were bringing negative attention to the building and had requested that I be asked to tone down my activism. I sat there, staring at that email, feeling anger rise in my chest. Even now, even after everything, there were people who wanted me to be quiet, to stop making waves, to go back to being invisible. The building management wasn't asking me to leave, but the message was clear. Your voice is making people uncomfortable. I wrote back immediately. I am engaged in lawful advocacy for civil rights and human dignity. I have no intention of toning down my activism. If my neighbor is uncomfortable with my message of respect and equality, that is their issue to work through, not mine. I copied my daughter Rebecca on the email, and she called me immediately. "Mom, I can't believe they sent you that," she said, outraged. "That's ridiculous. You're not doing anything wrong." I know I'm not, I said. And I'm not going to let anyone intimidate me into silence. Not anymore. Good, Rebecca said fiercely. Don't you dare back down. That night, lying in bed, I reflected on the challenges I was already facing. The hateful messages online, the attempt by my building management to silence me, the subtle and not so subtle pushback from people who were uncomfortable with my message. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, possibly even bigger ones. But I also knew something else. I was strong enough to face them. For the first time in my life, I truly believed in myself, believed that what I was doing mattered, believed that I had the right to stand up for myself and for others. The challenges would come, but I would meet them, because I had finally discovered something that had been inside me all along, an unshakable core of strength and dignity that no amount of cruelty could diminish. The weeks following my Good Morning America appearance were transformative in ways I never could have imagined. The interview had been seen by over 5 million people, and the clips circulating on social media had been viewed tens of millions of times. I had become, somewhat unexpectedly, a public figure in the body positivity movement. But the external changes, while significant, were nothing compared to the internal transformation I was experiencing. For the first time in my 72 years, I was developing genuine self-esteem, not the fake confidence you put on like a costume, but real, deep-rooted belief in my own worth and value. It started small. One morning, about 2 weeks after the Good Morning America interview, I was getting dressed and caught sight of myself in the mirror. My immediate, automatic response was the same one I had had for decades, a flash of disgust, a critical inventory of everything wrong with my body, a wish that I could somehow be different, smaller, more acceptable. But then I stopped myself. I really looked at my reflection, not with the critical eye I had trained on myself for so long, but with curiosity and, tentatively, with kindness. I saw a 72-year-old woman with gray hair and wrinkles and a fat body. I saw someone who had survived 7 decades in a world that told her she was worthless. I saw someone who had finally found her voice and was using it to create change. I saw someone strong. "You're okay," I said out loud to my reflection. Then more firmly, "You're more than okay. You're exactly who you need to be." It felt awkward and forced at first, talking to myself this way. But I kept doing it, every morning, practicing self-acceptance the way you would practice any other skill. Some days it felt more genuine than others. Some days the old patterns of self-hatred would creep back in, and I would have to consciously push them away. But gradually, over those weeks, something shifted. The kindness I was showing myself started to feel less like an act and more like the truth. I began making other changes too, small acts of self-care and self-respect that I had denied myself for decades. I started buying myself flowers every week, something I had always thought was frivolous or self-indulgent. I began taking longer baths with nice bath oils, treating my body with gentleness rather than punishment. I bought new sheets for my bed, high thread count cotton that felt luxurious against my skin. These might seem like small things, but for someone who had spent her entire life believing she didn't deserve nice things, they were revolutionary. I also started therapy. One of the advocacy organizations I had connected with recommended a therapist who specialized in body image issues and eating disorders. Dr. Patricia Williams was a Black woman in her 50s, plus size herself, who had decades of experience helping people heal their relationships with their bodies. Our first session was in early March. About 3 weeks after the bus incident, I sat in her comfortable office in Greenwich Village, surrounded by plants and soft lighting, and I told her my story. Not just the story of the bus, but the story of my entire life, the decades of shame and self-hatred, the ways I had made myself small, the cruelty I had experienced, and the cruelty I had inflicted on myself. Dr. Williams listened with deep attention, occasionally taking notes, never interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that made me cry. "Margaret, you've survived something that many people don't survive. You've lived for 72 years in a society that told you every single day that you were wrong, that you were less than, that you didn't deserve to exist as you are. And not only did you survive that, you've now decided to fight back, to use your voice to help others. That takes incredible strength. I want you to really hear that. You are incredibly strong. I had never thought of myself as strong. I had always thought of myself as weak, someone who couldn't control her weight, someone who couldn't stand up for herself. But Dr. Williams reframed my entire narrative. Surviving years of discrimination and cruelty while maintaining your humanity, your capacity for kindness, your ability to keep going, that was strength. Finally deciding to stand up for yourself and for others, that was strength too. Over the following weeks, my sessions with Dr. Williams helped me understand and dismantle the toxic beliefs I had carried for so long. We talked about internalized fat phobia, about how I had taken society's messages about my body and made them my own internal voice of criticism. We talked about the way diet culture had consumed years of my life and billions of dollars of my mental energy. We talked about learning to trust my body, to listen to its signals, to treat it with respect rather than punishment. Your body has carried you through 72 years, Dr. Williams said in one session. It's allowed you to raise children, to work, to volunteer, to experience the world. It's done all of that while you've been at war with it, while you've been trying to make it smaller, while you've been feeding it shame instead of nourishment. Imagine what might be possible if you made peace with your body, if you became its ally instead of its enemy. That idea, becoming my body's ally, was revolutionary. I had spent my entire life trying to control my body, to force it to be different, to punish it for being what it was. The idea of working with it instead of against it, of appreciating what it could do instead of criticizing what it looked like, felt almost subversive. I started doing small things to practice this new relationship with my body. When my knees hurt, instead of berating myself for being too heavy, I thanked my knees for carrying me all these years and gave them rest. When I felt hungry, instead of ignoring the signal or feeling guilty about it, I fed myself nourishing food without shame. When I looked in the mirror, instead of immediately cataloging everything I wanted to change, I found something to appreciate: my eyes, my smile, my hands that had held my children and my grandchildren. During this same period, I was also receiving incredible validation from external sources. I was invited to speak at events, to share my story with groups ranging from college students to senior citizens to healthcare professionals. Each speaking engagement reinforced that my message mattered, that my experience was valuable, that I had something important to contribute to the world. One particularly meaningful event was a panel discussion at NYU about weight stigma in healthcare. I shared the stage with doctors, researchers, and other advocates, and I spoke about my own experiences with medical fat phobia, the doctors who had dismissed my legitimate health concerns, who had blamed everything on my weight, who had prescribed weight loss as the cure for every ailment. After the panel, a young medical student approached me, tears in her eyes. "I'm in my 3rd year of medical school," she said, "and I'm plus size. I've experienced discrimination from my professors and fellow students, and I've been afraid that I won't be taken seriously as a doctor because of my body size. But hearing you speak, seeing how confident and powerful you are, it's giving me hope that I can succeed despite the stigma." I hugged her tightly. "You will succeed," I told her. "And when you're a doctor, you'll be able to give your patients the respect and competent care that they deserve, especially your plus-size patients who need advocates in the medical system." These kinds of interactions happened regularly now. Women would approach me in public places, recognizing me from the news coverage or social media. They would thank me, share their stories, tell me that I had inspired them to stand up for themselves. Each interaction reinforced my sense that this work was important, that my voice mattered, that I was making a real difference. I also reconnected with old friends during this period, but the dynamic had changed. Before, I had always felt like I needed to make myself small around them, to apologize for my body, to deflect compliments and minimize my accomplishments. Now I showed up differently. I took up space without apology. I accepted compliments gracefully. I shared my opinions confidently. Some friends adjusted well to this new version of me. Others seemed uncomfortable, used to the old Margaret who never made waves. One friend in particular, Linda, someone I had known for over 20 years, made a comment that revealed her discomfort. We were having coffee together in late March, and she said, "Margaret, I'm happy you're feeling more confident, but don't you think you're taking this whole thing a bit too far? All this talk about fat phobia and discrimination, aren't you making a bigger deal out of things than they need to be?" The old Margaret would have backed down, would have apologized for being too much, too loud, too difficult. But the new Margaret looked Linda in the eye and said, "No, I don't think I'm making too big a deal out of it. I think society has minimized these issues for far too long, and people like me have suffered because of that silence. If you're uncomfortable with me speaking up, that's something you need to examine, not something I need to apologize for." Linda looked shocked. She mumbled something about not meaning to offend me and changed the subject. Our friendship was never quite the same after that. Some relationships, I was learning, were predicated on me staying small and quiet. When I refused to do that anymore, those relationships couldn't survive. And I was okay with that, quality over quantity. I would rather have a few genuine friendships where I could be my authentic self than many superficial relationships where I had to perform a diminished version of who I was. By the end of March, about 6 weeks after the bus incident, I had developed something I had never had before: genuine self-esteem. It wasn't dependent on external validation, though that certainly helped. It wasn't contingent on changing my body or becoming someone different. It was rooted in a deep, fundamental belief that I was worthy of respect and dignity exactly as I was. I had spent 72 years waiting to be thin enough, good enough, small enough to deserve happiness and respect. I had spent decades putting my life on hold, telling myself that I would do things, be things, achieve things when I lose the weight, and now, finally, I understood the truth. I didn't need to lose weight to deserve a good life. I didn't need to change my body to be worthy of love and respect. I was enough right now exactly as I was. This realization was so profound, so life-changing, that I found myself grieving for all the years I had wasted hating myself. But I also felt profound gratitude that I had figured it out at all, even if it took 72 years. Better late than never. And now, with however much time I had left, I was going to live fully, unapologetically, as my authentic self, a fat, elderly woman who demanded respect and who refused to apologize for taking up space in the world. If you believe that obese women can achieve anything, subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who needs to be empowered. As my confidence grew and my voice became stronger, I began to think beyond my own personal journey. Yes, I had experienced a transformation, and yes, I was helping individual women find their own strength through my public advocacy. But I wanted to do more. I wanted to create systemic change, to develop practical solutions to the problems that plus-size people faced every day. It was early April, about 2 months after the bus incident, when I had a conversation that would change the direction of my advocacy. I had been invited to speak at a conference on body diversity in Boston, and I met a woman there named Dr. Lakshmi Patel, a researcher who studied accessibility and design. Over lunch, Dr. Patel told me about her work. Most public spaces are designed with an average body in mind, she explained, but that average is actually quite narrow. It excludes fat people, very tall people, very short people, people with disabilities, pregnant women, basically anyone who doesn't fit into a very specific body template, and this exclusion is rarely accidental. It's the result of design decisions that either don't consider diverse bodies or actively discriminate against them. This conversation sparked something in me. I started thinking about all the spaces and situations where I had been excluded or made uncomfortable because they weren't designed for bodies like mine. Airplane seats, restaurant booths, theater seats, doctor's examination tables, clothing stores, turnstiles, amusement park rides. The list went on and on. What if we created a guide? I said to Dr. Patel, a resource for businesses and organizations that wanted to be more size inclusive? Something that could help them understand how to design spaces and experiences that work for all body sizes? Dr. Patel's eyes lit up. That's a brilliant idea, and you would be the perfect person to lead that project. You have the lived experience, the platform, and the credibility to make it work. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into this new project. I reached out to other advocates, to designers, to accessibility experts, to business owners who were already doing good work in this area. I crowdsourced experiences from plus-size people online, asking them to share the spaces and situations where they had felt excluded or uncomfortable. The responses were overwhelming. Thousands of people shared their stories. A woman who couldn't fit in an MRI machine and had to drive 3 hours to find a facility with an open MRI. A man who was fired from his job because he couldn't fit in the company's ergonomic desk chairs. A teenager who was excluded from a school field trip because the bus seats were too small. A woman who missed her grandmother's funeral because she couldn't fit in the church pews. Story after story of exclusion, indignity, and pain. I compiled all of this, feedback into a comprehensive document I called the Size Inclusive Design Guide. It covered everything from furniture selection to bathroom stall design, to medical equipment, to clothing size ranges, to language and communication. I broke it down by industry: healthcare, retail, transportation, hospitality, entertainment, workplace, education, with specific recommendations for each.